The first time my daughter-in-law said the baby wasn't my son's, she didn't look angry. She looked relieved. It happened in my kitchen on a quiet Tuesday afternoon, with the kettle still humming and the smell of boiled milk hanging in the air. I remember thinking how strange it was that something so small, a sentence really, could rearrange the entire shape of a family. I didn't know then that those words would follow me into sleepless nights, whispered phone calls, and a truth so sharp it would cut straight through every lie she had wrapped around it. But that day, all I could do was stare at her and wonder where I had gone wrong. Before everything broke apart, my life was simple in a way I had come to cherish. I was a mother of one. Just one son, Amir, whom I raised mostly on my own after his father passed away when Amir was 12. We weren't wealthy, but we were close, the kind of close where you know the sound of each other's footsteps, where silence doesn't feel awkward, just comfortable. I worked part-time at a tailoring shop, my fingers stiff from years of stitching hems and adjusting sleeves. Amir worked in logistics, long hours, early mornings. He used to stop by my house every Sunday without fail, always bringing something warm, naan wrapped in newspaper, sometimes sweets, sometimes nothing at all but himself. When he married Sana, I believed, honestly, that life had given him a blessing. She was quiet, soft-spoken, the kind of girl who smiled with her lips, but not always with her eyes. At first, I told myself that was shyness. Not everyone grows up knowing how to fit into another family's rhythm. Their wedding was modest, white flowers, gold bangles clinking gently at her wrists. I remember watching her sit beside my son, her hands folded neatly in her lap, and thinking, "Take care of him. He has already lost one parent." For the first year of their marriage, I tried to be the kind of mother-in-law people praise from a distance. I didn't interfere. I didn't show up unannounced. I called before visiting. I brought food, but never opinions. Still, there was always something held back. Sana was polite, but distant. Conversations felt like walking on tiles that might crack if I stepped wrong. Amir, on the other hand, seemed happy enough. Tired, yes, but hopeful. He spoke about buying a bigger apartment one day, about children. When Sana announced she was pregnant, Amir cried. He stood right there in my living room, a grown man with a trimmed beard and calloused hands covering his face like a boy. I hugged him and felt his shoulders shake. In that moment, everything I had endured, every lonely evening, every sacrifice felt worth it. I thanked God that night with my forehead pressed into the prayer mat. For a while, the pregnancy softened Sana. She let me touch her belly once, briefly. The baby kicked under my palm like a secret tapping from the inside. I cooked soups and sent them over. I knit a tiny sweater, blue, then another in yellow, just in case. But as the months passed, something shifted. Sana stopped answering my calls. Amir explained it away. She was tired, hormonal, overwhelmed. I believed him because believing him was easier than letting doubt root deep. The day the baby was born, I waited by my phone like a schoolgirl waiting for exam results. Hours passed, then a message came, not from Amir, but from Sana. A girl, it read, healthy. No photo, no invitation to visit. I told myself not to read into it. When I finally saw my granddaughter a week later, she was tiny and wrinkled, with a tuft of dark hair plastered to her head. Amir hovered beside the bed, smiling too much, his eyes red-rimmed with exhaustion. Sana barely looked at me. I chalked it up to postpartum stress. New mothers need space, I reminded myself, so I kissed the baby's forehead, whispered a prayer, and left without staying too long. It was 2 months later when Sana asked to speak to me alone. She came to my house in the afternoon, the baby strapped to her chest. Amir was at work. I made tea, set out biscuits, did everything a woman does when she wants to keep things normal. She didn't touch the cup. "I need to tell you something," she said, her voice steady, in a way that made my stomach tighten. I waited. She looked down at the baby, adjusted the strap, then lifted her eyes to mine. "The baby isn't Amir's." The room felt suddenly too small. The walls leaned in. The kettle clicked off behind me, loud in the silence. I laughed, not because it was funny, but because my mind rejected the sentence like a body rejecting poison. "What nonsense," I said. "Don't joke like that." She didn't smile. "I'm serious," she replied. "I didn't want him to know yet. I thought you should." My hands went cold. I remember noticing a loose thread on the edge of the tablecloth, how my eyes clung to it as if it could anchor me. "Why would you say such a thing?" I asked. My voice sounded far away, like it belonged to someone else. She swallowed. "Because it's true." I wanted to ask 100 questions. When, how, why? Instead, the only thing that came out was, "Does my son know?" "No," she said quickly, "and I don't want you to tell him." There it was, the real reason she had come. She spoke then in a rush, about mistakes, about a past relationship she said had ended before the wedding, about timing that didn't add up. She said she was protecting Amir, protecting the family. I listened, nodding when she paused, though my heart was pounding so loudly I could hear it in my ears. When she finished, she looked at me with something close to hope. "I knew you'd understand," she said softly. I didn't understand, but I also didn't know how to shatter my son's life with nothing but suspicion and fear in my hands. So I did what many mothers do when they are cornered between truth and love. I stayed quiet. That night I lay awake staring at the ceiling, the fan ticking rhythmically above me. I replayed her words again and again, searching for cracks, for lies, for mercy. And somewhere deep inside, a thought whispered that refused to be silenced. What if she's lying? I pushed it away. At least, I tried to. Silence has a weight to it when you carry it for someone else. In the days after Sana's confession, I moved through my routines like a woman underwater. I woke before dawn, folded my prayer mat, stitched seams at the shop, nodded at customers whose faces blurred together. On the surface, nothing had changed. Inside me, everything was unsettled, like furniture rearranged in the dark. I watched Amir more closely after that. He came over one Sunday with groceries, balancing 2 bags in his arms like he always did. He kissed my forehead, asked if I was eating properly, complained about traffic, ordinary things. He spoke about the baby with a tenderness that made my chest ache. "She smiles in her sleep now," he said, grinning, "like she's dreaming of something nice." I stirred the pot on the stove and said nothing. My spoon scraped the bottom a little too hard. I started noticing things I hadn't paid attention to before. How Sana always positioned herself between Amir and the baby when they sat together. How she avoided family gatherings, using the child as an excuse. How she flinched whenever Amir joked about whose nose the baby had inherited. "She's just sensitive," Amir told me when I mentioned it gently. "You know how women get after birth." I bit my tongue until I tasted blood. At night, my thoughts spiraled. I imagined my son's face if he found out the baby wasn't his, the way betrayal could hollow a man out, leave him walking around like a shell. I also imagined the baby, innocent, warm, unaware of the storm hovering above her tiny life. What right did I have to tear that apart? Still, the question refused to leave me. What if she's lying? The first real crack appeared on an ordinary afternoon at the tailoring shop. A woman came in with a dress that needed adjusting. She chatted as I worked, the way people do when they want to fill silence. She mentioned Sana's family in passing, how they lived 2 streets over from her cousin, how small the neighborhood felt sometimes. She married into a good family, lucky girl after all that trouble. My needle paused mid-stitch. What trouble? The woman waved her hand vaguely. Oh, you know, before the wedding, there was a boy. Everyone thought she'd marry him, but then suddenly it was your son. Things happen. I forced a smile, finished the hem, and sent her on her way, but my hands shook as I cleaned my workspace. That evening, I couldn't eat. I sat at my small kitchen table, the light flickering slightly overhead, and tried to make sense of what I was feeling. It wasn't anger exactly. It was a slow, creeping dread. I realized then that Sana had given me a story, but no proof. No dates, no names, just enough to frighten me into silence. The next time I saw my granddaughter, I studied her more closely than I ever had before. Her skin was a shade lighter than Amir's, but not impossibly so. Her eyes were dark like his. She had his stubborn little chin. When she cried, her face scrunched up the same way his used to when he was a baby. None of that meant anything, I told myself. Babies change, genetics are strange. Still, I began asking small questions, careful not to let them sound like accusations. How are you feeling? I asked Sana once while Amir was in the other room. Tired, she replied. Why? No reason, just checking. She watched me then, her eyes sharp, measuring. From that day on, her visits grew shorter. She declined my offers to babysit. If Amir insisted, she hovered, correcting me, adjusting the baby's blanket, taking her back at the slightest fuss. One afternoon, as she gathered her things to leave, she paused at the door. You haven't told him, have you? She asked quietly. I shook my head. Good, she said. It would destroy him. After she left, I sat down heavily on the sofa. The cushions sagged under my weight. Something in her tone had unsettled me. Not fear, not shame, but control. I began to realize that my silence wasn't protecting my son. It was protecting her. The thought came with a wave of guilt so strong I had to close my eyes. I tried to pray, but my words tangled. I asked God for guidance, for clarity, for a sign. I didn't ask for courage yet. I wasn't ready. The sign came anyway, disguised as coincidence. Amir called me late one night, his voice tight. Can I come over? He arrived an hour later, eyes rimmed red, jaw clenched. He sat at my table, hands wrapped around a mug of untouched tea. She doesn't trust me, he said suddenly. I didn't speak. She checks my phone, questions where I go. Today she accused me of cheating. He laughed bitterly. I barely have time to sleep. I felt my heart twist. Why would she think that? I don't know, he said. It's like she's always on edge, like she's afraid of something. I looked at my son, my only child, and saw the strain etched in his face, the weight of secrets he didn't even know he was carrying. In that moment, my choice became clear. Truth doesn't disappear just because we close our eyes to it. The next day, I made an appointment at a private clinic. I told myself it was just for peace of mind, that I wouldn't do anything with the results unless I had to, that knowledge was better than suspicion. Arranging the test was easier than I expected. The nurse was kind, professional. She didn't ask questions that mattered. Getting a sample from the baby was harder. I asked Amir if I could watch her one afternoon while Sana visited her mother. He agreed without hesitation. When I swabbed my granddaughter's cheek, she gurgled and grabbed my finger, her tiny hand warm and trusting. Tears blurred my vision. I'm doing this for you, too, I whispered. The wait for the results felt endless. Each day stretched thin like fabric pulled too tight. I avoided Sana's eyes. I avoided Amir's questions. I lived in the space between what I feared and what I hoped. When the clinic finally called, my phone trembled in my hand. "The results are ready," the voice said. I sat down slowly, my knees weak. "Yes," I said, "I'll come today." As I hung up, a single thought echoed in my mind, heavy and unavoidable. Everything is about to change. The clinic smelled faintly of disinfectant and something sweet I couldn't place. Maybe the candy the receptionist kept in a bowl to soften bad news. I sat in a plastic chair, my purse clutched tightly in my lap, staring at a framed picture of a smiling family on the wall. A mother, a father, 2 children, everyone whole, everyone certain. My name was called, and I followed the nurse down a narrow hallway. Each step felt deliberate, like my body already knew what my mind was still afraid to accept. The doctor was a middle-aged woman with gentle eyes. She didn't rush. That alone scared me. She slid a folder across the desk and folded her hands. "We ran the comparison," she said. "The child is biologically related to your son." The words didn't register at first. "I'm sorry?" I asked. "She is his daughter," the doctor repeated, clearly now. "The probability is over 99%. Something loosened in my chest, sharp and sudden. My breath came out in a broken sound I hadn't meant to make. I pressed my hand over my mouth, tears spilling without warning. "She's his," I whispered. "Yes," the doctor said softly. I don't remember how I left the clinic. I don't remember the drive home. I only remember sitting on my bed afterward, the test results spread out in front of me like proof of a crime. Sana had lied. Not a mistake, not confusion, a deliberate lie. I thought of every moment I had stayed quiet, every time I had watched my son dote on his child while believing, somewhere deep down, that she might not be his. I thought of the way Sana had looked at me that afternoon in my kitchen, relieved, confident, certain she had secured my silence. My hands began to shake. This wasn't about fear anymore. This was about control. I didn't confront her right away. I needed time, not to cool down, but to understand what I was dealing with. Sana wasn't reckless. She was careful, calculated. Whatever her reason for lying, it had been chosen deliberately. I waited 3 days. On the 4th, I invited them both over for dinner. I cooked Amir's favorite meal, lentils slow-simmered with garlic and cumin, rice fluffed just right. The smell filled the house, warm and familiar, normal. I wanted this to feel like any other family evening. I wanted no excuses for hysteria. Sana arrived holding the baby, her expression guarded. Amir kissed my cheek, smiling. I returned it, my heart pounding. We ate. We talked about small things, the weather, a neighbor's new car, a television show Amir liked. Sana barely spoke. After dinner, Amir stood to clear the table. "I'll wash up," he said. "No," I replied quickly. "Sit, I'll do it." I waited until he stepped out onto the balcony to take a call. Then I turned to Sana. "I went to a clinic," I said calmly. Her fork froze halfway to the plate. "I had a DNA test done," I continued, my voice steady despite the storm inside me. "The baby is my son's." The color drained from her face. For a moment she said nothing, then she laughed, a short, brittle sound. "You had no right." "I had every right. You came into my home and told my son wasn't a father to his own child." Her eyes darted toward the balcony door. "You promised you wouldn't tell him." "I promised to stay quiet until I knew the truth," I replied. "Now I do." She leaned forward, lowering her voice. "If you tell him, you'll ruin everything." "No," I said softly. "You already did." Tears welled in her eyes then, but they didn't move me. I had learned something important over the years. Not all tears come from regret. "He would have left me," she whispered. If he thought I'd ever doubted him, if he knew I'd been scared. So you decided to destroy his trust before he even had a chance to lose it himself? I asked. She pressed her lips together, silent. When Amir returned, the air in the room felt different, thick, charged. "What's wrong?" he asked, looking between us. I took a breath, one long, grounding breath. "Sit down," I said. He did. I placed the folder on the table and slid it toward him. "You need to see this." He frowned, opened it, scanned the pages. I watched his expression shift from confusion to disbelief to something darker. "What is this?" he asked. "It's a DNA test. Your daughter is yours." His head snapped up, eyes wide. "Why would anyone test that?" Sana broke then. "I was scared. I didn't want to lose you." "Lose me?" Amir repeated. His voice was quiet, dangerous. "You told my mother my child wasn't mine." He stood up so fast his chair scraped loudly against the floor. "I thought—" "You thought lying was better than trust? You thought making my mother carry that secret was kindness?" She reached for him. He stepped back. The baby began to cry, startled by the raised voices. Amir rubbed his face with both hands. When he looked up again, his eyes were wet. "How long? How long were you going to let me believe that?" She had no answer. That night, Amir didn't go home with her. He stayed on my sofa, staring at the ceiling the way he used to after his father died. I brought him a blanket. He didn't speak. In the days that followed, the truth spread, not loudly, not dramatically, but inevitably. Sana's parents called. There were tears, apologies, explanations that explained nothing. Amir moved back home temporarily, bringing his daughter with him during the day. I watched him learn how to bathe her, how to soothe her cries. His love for her never wavered, but something in him had hardened. Sana came by once, standing at my door with red eyes and trembling hands. "I made a mistake," she said. I looked at her, really looked at her, and saw a young woman who had chosen fear over honesty. "Some mistakes don't disappear just because we admit them," I replied. She nodded slowly, as if she already knew. Life didn't resolve itself neatly after that. It rarely does. But the lie was gone, and in its place, something fragile but real began to grow. Truth has a way of rearranging relationships without asking for permission. In the weeks after Amir moved back home, our small house filled with new sounds: soft crying at dawn, the rustle of diapers, the quiet murmur of a father learning how to soothe his child. I watched him from the doorway sometimes, standing awkwardly with the baby pressed against his shoulder, swaying back and forth the way instinct seems to teach men when words fail. He was gentle, patient, broken in places he didn't yet know how to mend. Sana didn't disappear, though. She hovered at the edges of our lives like a shadow that couldn't decide whether to retreat or step fully into the light. At first, she called Amir constantly. When he didn't answer, she texted. When he didn't reply, she came by unannounced. She stood at my gate once, holding a bag of baby clothes, her face pale with desperation. "I just want to see her," she said. I looked past her to the street, then back again. "You can," I said, "but not like this." She stepped inside, quiet and careful, as if afraid the walls themselves might judge her. She went straight to the baby, scooping her up with trembling hands, kissing her cheeks over and over. Amir watched from across the room, arms crossed. "You lied to my mother," he said. "You lied to me. That doesn't disappear because you're holding her." Sana's shoulders sagged. "I was scared." "I was scared too," he replied, "and you made it worse." They tried counseling. I know this because Amir told me one night as we washed dishes side by side, the sound of running water filling the space between us. "I don't know if I can trust her again," he said quietly. You don't have to decide everything at once, I told him. Healing isn't a race. What I didn't say was that some wounds leave scars even when they close. The community found out in pieces, the way stories always do. A whisper here, a question there. Sana's lie became a quiet scandal, not shouted, but understood. Women looked at her differently at gatherings. Conversations paused when she entered a room. I didn't enjoy that. I took no pleasure in her discomfort, but I didn't shield her from it either. One afternoon, her mother came to see me. She sat stiffly on my sofa, hands folded in her lap, eyes rimmed red. "She's ashamed," she said. "She thought she was protecting her marriage." "Protection built on lies collapses," I replied gently. The woman nodded. "What do you want?" I thought about that. I want my son to feel safe in his own family. I want my granddaughter to grow up without secrets poisoning her life. She swallowed. "And Sana?" I met her gaze. "That depends on the choices she makes now." Time passed. Amir didn't rush back into the marriage, but he didn't sever it either. He focused on being a father. He learned routines. He learned patience. I saw him soften around the edges again, even as he remained cautious. As for me, I carried my own quiet reckoning. I had stayed silent when silence felt easier. I had doubted my instincts. The truth came out anyway, but not without cost. One evening, after putting the baby to sleep, Amir sat beside me on the sofa. "You saved me," he said suddenly. I shook my head. "I almost didn't." "But you did," he replied. "You chose truth when it mattered." I thought of Sana's relieved face in my kitchen that day, of my own fear, of the thin line between loyalty and complicity. "I learned something too," I said. "Love doesn't mean carrying someone else's lies." Sana changed after that, slowly, imperfectly. She stopped defending herself and started listening. She stopped demanding forgiveness and began earning trust, step by careful step. She apologized to Amir, to me, not once, but repeatedly, without excuses. Whether it would ever be enough, only time could decide. What I knew was this: families don't break from truth. They break from the absence of it. And sometimes protecting the ones we love means facing the discomfort we'd rather avoid. The baby slept peacefully between us, unaware of the storm she had survived before she could even speak. I watched her chest rise and fall and felt a quiet certainty settle in my heart. She would grow up knowing she was wanted. She would grow up knowing the truth. And that, I believed, mattered more than anything. Healing doesn't arrive all at once. It comes in fragments, small, almost unnoticeable moments that slowly stitch themselves into something livable, a shared smile, a calm conversation that doesn't turn sharp, a night of uninterrupted sleep. In the months that followed, our lives settled into a rhythm that felt unfamiliar but steady. Amir found a small apartment not far from my house, close enough that I could help, far enough that he could breathe. He took his daughter there on weekends, learning how to be a single parent even while his marriage remained suspended in a quiet, uncertain space. Sana continued therapy on her own. She didn't announce it or ask for praise. She simply went, week after week, and slowly learned how to sit with the consequences of her choices. One afternoon, she came by while Amir was out. She stood awkwardly in my doorway. No baby this time, no bag in her hands. "I need to say something," she said. I stepped aside and let her in. She sat on the edge of the chair, her back straight, her hands folded tightly together. There was no performance in her posture now, no defense. "I was afraid of losing him," she began. "But what I was really afraid of was being exposed. I didn't trust myself to be enough." I listened. I used you, she continued, her voice barely above a whisper. I put you in a terrible position. I'm sorry. It wasn't the apology that moved me. It was the absence of urgency. She wasn't asking me to fix anything. I forgive you, I said after a moment. But forgiveness doesn't erase memory. It just lets us move forward without bitterness. She nodded, tears spilling quietly. From then on, things shifted. She stopped avoiding my eyes. She stopped managing narratives. She let herself be seen, not as a victim, not as a villain, but as a woman who had made a terrible choice and was learning how to live honestly again. Amir noticed too. She's different, he said one evening as we walked the baby in her stroller. Not perfect, just real. I smiled. Real is a good place to start. Eventually, they made a decision not to rush back into marriage as it was, but to rebuild it carefully with boundaries and counseling and uncomfortable conversations. It wasn't a dramatic reunion. There were no grand gestures, just effort, just truth. The community, ever watchful, slowly shifted its gaze elsewhere. Scandals lose their shine when there's no more secrecy to feed them. And me? I learned to trust my instincts again. I learned that motherhood doesn't end when our children grow up. It evolves into something quieter but no less fierce, a readiness to step into discomfort if it means protecting their future. One evening, as I watched my granddaughter toddle across the living room, arms outstretched, laughter bubbling up from somewhere deep inside her, I felt a sense of peace I hadn't known in a long time. Life hadn't turned out the way I once imagined, but it had turned out honest. And honesty, I had learned, is the foundation everything else stands on. Time has a strange way of revealing what forgiveness really costs. Months passed, then a year, and life continued, not smoothly, not perfectly, but honestly. That honesty demanded more than apologies and therapy sessions. It demanded endurance. The first real test came at a family wedding. It was my cousin's daughter getting married, a large gathering with relatives I hadn't seen in years, the kind of event where people smile too much and ask questions they already think they know the answers to. Amir hesitated before going. Sana hesitated longer. I don't want to embarrass you, she told me quietly when we sat together the night before. People still talk. They always will, I replied. What matters is how you walk into the room. She nodded, absorbing that in silence. At the wedding hall, eyes followed us. I felt them, quick glances, half smiles, whispers that stopped when we drew near. Sana held the baby close, her shoulders stiff. Amir kept his hand firmly on his daughter's back, steady, protective. Someone eventually said what everyone else was thinking. An aunt leaned over during dinner and whispered, not quite softly enough, "So the baby, there were rumors." The table went quiet. Amir didn't look at Sana. He didn't look at me. He simply said, calmly, "She's my daughter. There's nothing else to say." His voice didn't shake. That moment, small to anyone else, felt enormous to me. It was the sound of a man reclaiming his dignity. Later that night, Sana sat beside me while the baby slept in her arms. "Thank you for not hiding me," she said. I looked at her, really looked at her. You can't heal in hiding. None of us can. But healing is not linear. There were setbacks, arguments that flared unexpectedly, old fears that resurfaced in the middle of calm days. Amir struggled with trust in quiet moments, when Sana stayed late at work, when her phone buzzed too often. Once, after a particularly tense evening, he came to my house alone. "I don't know if I'm strong enough," he admitted, staring at the floor. I sat beside him, close enough that our shoulders touched. I said, strength isn't staying no matter what. Strength is choosing what's healthy, even if it hurts. He nodded slowly, tears pooling but not falling. There was another conversation, one I hadn't anticipated. Sana asked to speak to me alone again, almost 2 years after that first confession. We sat at the same kitchen table, the same kettle hummed in the background. Life had a way of circling back. "I need to tell you something," she said. My heart tightened, not with fear this time, but awareness. "I was pregnant when I married Amir," she said quietly. "I didn't know for sure who the father was until later. By then I panicked." I listened, my hands folded neatly in my lap. I convinced myself that if I said the baby wasn't his, I could control the story. I didn't expect you to test. I thought, mothers protect sons from pain. I thought you'd keep quiet forever. There it was, the truth beneath the truth. "You underestimated me," she finished, "and I underestimated what honesty costs." I leaned back slightly, breathing in slowly. "You didn't just lie to Amir. You tried to turn me into someone who would betray my own child for the sake of comfort." Her eyes filled. "I know." That conversation changed something fundamental between us. It stripped away the last layer of misunderstanding. From that day on, there were no half-truths left. Whether the marriage would last forever, I didn't know, but I knew this: whatever happened next would be built on truth, not fear. As my granddaughter grew, she became the quiet center around which everything else rotated. Her laughter softened tensions. Her first steps felt like a promise. Her tiny fingers wrapped around mine reminded me why all of this had mattered. One evening, as I rocked her to sleep, I felt a familiar ache in my chest, the ache of loving something deeply while knowing you can't control the world she'll grow into. "I hope we did right by you," I whispered. Outside, the call to prayer drifted through the air, low and steady. I closed my eyes and let the sound wash over me. Families don't survive because they avoid pain. They survive because someone is brave enough to tell the truth when silence would be easier. I had learned that the hard way. And if I had to live this story again, knowing the cost, knowing the sleepless nights and fractured relationships, I would still choose the truth, every single time. When I look back now, I don't remember the anger first. I remember the silence. The kind of silence that settles into a house when people stop telling the truth and start protecting themselves instead. The kind that pretends to be peace but slowly eats away at trust. If I'm honest, there were moments when I wished I had never known, moments when ignorance felt kinder than clarity. It would have been easier to believe the lie, to stay quiet, to tell myself that love means endurance no matter the cost. But love without truth is not protection, it is delay. Delay of pain, delay of reckoning, delay of healing. I learned that being a mother doesn't mean shielding your child from every hurt. Sometimes it means standing between them and a lie, even when that lie comes wrapped in fear, tears, and promises of comfort. There were nights I questioned myself, nights I replayed that moment in my kitchen when Sana first spoke those words, nights I wondered if I could have handled it differently, more gently, more wisely. But every time I doubted, I looked at my granddaughter. I watched her grow, steady, curious, unburdened by secrets she never asked to carry. And I knew that truth, painful as it was, had given her something invaluable, a clean beginning. Families don't fall apart because someone tells the truth. They fall apart because truth is delayed too long. What surprised me most wasn't Sana's lie, it was how close I came to participating in it, how easily love can be twisted into silence, how quickly fear can convince us that doing nothing is kindness. I learned that courage doesn't always look loud. Sometimes it looks like making a phone call you don't want to make. Sometimes it looks like waiting for results you're terrified to see. Sometimes it looks like telling the truth calmly, without cruelty, and allowing people to face the consequences of their choices. I also learned something harder, that forgiveness is not forgetting, that reconciliation is not obligation, and that rebuilding trust takes time, humility, and honesty, not performance. Today, our family is not perfect, but it is real. There are still awkward moments, still careful conversations, still memories that sting when touched, but there is also laughter, growth, and a shared understanding that honesty is no longer negotiable, and that is enough. If you are listening to my story and carrying a secret that doesn't belong to you, if you are protecting someone else's lie at the cost of your own peace, if you are afraid that telling the truth will destroy everything, ask yourself this: is silence truly protecting your family, or is it just postponing the pain? Because in my experience, truth doesn't destroy families, lies do. Thank you for listening to my story. If you were in my place, would you have stayed quiet, or would you have chosen the truth? Let me know in the comments. And if stories like mine speak to your heart, don't forget to subscribe and support the channel. You never know whose silence might finally break because they heard this one.